The people in the slums were shot dead in the street, simply because they could not afford to pay the huge protection fee. But these people who killed him turned out to be the military and police self-defense forces, who claimed to be protecting the people, and those infamous drug lords, if they did not sell enough contraband on their turf, resulting in less money for this group of military police, would also unceremoniously finish them off and scavenge everything they had on them. They have been enriching themselves in the civilian neighborhoods of Rio under the banner of protecting civilians. When the people watched TV and surfed the internet, or even used gas to drink a mouthful of water, they would all be secretly charged 50% of the money. His monthly salary was only $500, but his real income amounted to as much as $300,000. Some people reported to the higher authorities, but the first day just announced. The next day, when he waited for the investigation to take evidence, he changed his story and said that he had drunk too much yesterday and was talking nonsense. Then all that awaited him was to be shot at random. This group of self-defense gays, in order to get the patronage of the big brother, they organize parties to canvass for the governor and for the governor as long as they can get him re-elected and secure his current position. It doesn't matter if you're a gangster or a gangster cop, you're a friend. And soon, with the governor's connivance, there was only one neighborhood left in all of Rio that was out of their control. Because it was the gangster's lair, there was no way to take it down with just them alone. In order to get the government to send elite troops to support them and still make it acceptable to the people. So, the self-defense forces took their weapons, put on their hoods, and waltzed into the local police station, ransacked all the weapons and ammunition inside, and then framed the gangsters for it.
Isso não é banditismo, não! Isso é terrorismo! Porrada nele!
This made the governor's sending of elite troops to sweep the gangs a compliant thing to do. The elite troops drove their armored vehicles to the gangsters' lair. It didn't take long for the gangsters to give it all a clean sweep. But after Captain Andrew took pictures of the captured weapons and passed them on to his superiors for verification, he realized that none of them were lost by the police department. None of the guns were the ones lost by the police. Luckily, they captured the gang leader alive. The leader who was directly tortured and questioned, but did nothing. Even after being beaten to death, he couldn't reveal the whereabouts of the weapons. Just then, the long-awaited self-defense Captain Roca, fearing that the matter would be exposed, immediately rushed in and killed the leader with a single shot.
Que porra é essa, Rocha? Tá maluco, porra? O cara é o dono do morro e me dá porra das armas, rapaz! Parabéns, excelente trabalho do Bob, cara.
At this point, Andrew is still completely unaware that all this is just a scene made up by the self-defense forces. Andrew says that he must go back and make Roca write a written report. Next thing you know, they're giving Andrew a high-profile funeral. It was thought that this incident would be hidden from the public, but Andrew's boss, Robert, became suspicious. Because he knew Andrew's strength, it was impossible for the enemy to shoot him at close range. Robert then uses his identity in the security bureau to secretly listen to all the clues about Andrew's death. Meanwhile, a female reporter also receives a tip-off that the police station's weapons were robbed by the self-defense forces. She immediately follows the self-defense force with her colleagues all the way to an apartment in the slums and discovers the weapons that were taken. After watching the self-defense forces leave, the female reporter and her colleague posed as a couple and managed to get inside the house under the pretext of renting an apartment. The landlord told them to take a look around first, then claimed he had something to do and left. They couldn't believe their eyes when they walked into the room. It was filled with campaign materials for the governor, so the female reporter immediately contacted the congressman to tell him everything she had seen.
Tudo certo, tá tudo certo. Não, cara, eu entrei na casa.
Me escuta, sai daí agora, Clara!
But just then, Roca returned with his self-defense force, and the reporter was killed by them. And all this happened to be bugged by Robert's men. The next day, when Robert hears the female reporter talking to the congressman, he directly unplugged the recording and rushed out towards the door, because his ex-wife and son were with him. On the way, Robert fumed like crazy to call his ex-wife, but his ex-wife did not want to be in front of her current husband, answered the phone and hung up directly. Robert had to stay at their home downstairs. Just as his ex-wife was about to reach the door, a motorcycle suddenly sped up. Robert was just about to go after it when he heard his ex-wife's cries. The guy who had just hit their son unfortunately drove to the hospital immediately. After seeing that their son was resuscitated, he handed over the recording to the MP and left the hospital alone. Leading an elite unit, he stops the governor's leader on the road and proceeds to drag him out of the car and beat him up, wanting him to kill all his family members if they even half-ass it. Robert's action also stops them from covering their asses, and they decide to do one thing or the other, and just send in their men to try to kill Robert. Robert drove through a corner when the black car suddenly blocked his way. Robert makes a sharp turn, but more cars appear behind him, and as soon as the self-defense forces in the black cars get out, they greet Robert with a hail of bullets. Robert quickly rolled out of the car, and the men behind him fired wildly with their guns. But these men weren't here to finish Robert off. They were Robert's former men who had been born to die. The self-defense forces were no match for the elite troops, who were firing on all cylinders and were soon beaten off. A few days later, Robert attends a hearing organized by legislators, and corrupt officials jump up and down to obstruct it. Robert ignored them and said that 90% of his colleagues should be put in jail. Robert's words drew an outcry from the room, but he still went from name to name, blowing the whistle on the scandals of most of the legislators underneath. The diatribe went on for 3 hours, and because of his speech, those corrupt councilors went to jail one after another, while the remaining scum who wanted to avoid sanctions were destroyed by various forces. Though this time good triumphed over evil, the corruption in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, didn't stop for a moment.